You've seen the paintings. You've watched the movies. You think you know the story of the people who lived on the Great Plains. But here is the thing that nobody tells you. You were never looking at the wrong history. You were looking at the right history through the wrong eyes. The tools were always there. The genius was always visible. You just didn't know what you were seeing. Let me ask you something that sounds simple but isn't. What is technology? Is it a screen? A circuit board? A factory? Because the Lakota people of the North American plains had no screens, no factories, no written blueprints, and yet they engineered solutions so precise, so efficient, so deeply intelligent, that modern scientists are still studying them today. That question, what technology really means, is something we will answer together by the end of this video. But not yet. Welcome to Primal Echoes, where we go beyond the textbook version of history to uncover the raw, human intelligence behind ancient survival. This channel exists for one reason: to show you that the most extraordinary engineering in human history happened long before the first factory was ever built. In this episode, I'm going to show you how the Lakota transformed a bison's gallbladder into an airtight water flask that cooled its own contents in desert heat. How they read tomorrow's blizzard, not from a weather station, but from the dried lungs of an animal hanging silently inside a teepee. And how they cooked a full meal for an entire camp without a single pot, a single flame touching the food, using nothing but river stones and a stomach. Stay with me until the end, because this isn't just history. What you're about to hear will change the way you look at the word survival, forever. To understand what the Lakota built, you first have to feel where they lived, not read about it, not look at it on a map. Feel it. The Great Plains of North America stretch over 500 million acres. A sea of grass so vast, so flat, so relentlessly exposed that the wind never stops moving. There is nothing to slow it down. No mountain range, no tree line, no valley to duck into when the sky turns violent. In summer, the ground bakes to over 110 degrees Fahrenheit, and the sun reflects off the grass in waves that distort the horizon and make distances impossible to judge. In winter, blizzards materialize with almost no warning and drop temperatures to -40 overnight. Not -40 with a warm coat and a heated shelter waiting for you, but -40 in the open, on the plain, with the wind driving ice crystals horizontally into your face. This was not a forgiving land. This was a land that did not negotiate. A land that killed the unprepared not over days, but within hours. And the Lakota had chosen to call it home. At their peak, the Lakota numbered around 20,000 people, spread across this enormous and indifferent expanse in mobile bands, moving constantly, following the greatest animal migration on the continent. At one point in history, an estimated 60 million bison roamed these plains, a number so staggering it is almost physically impossible to visualize. Imagine standing on flat ground and watching a living mass of muscle, horn, and bone stretching from the horizon behind you to the horizon in front of you, the earth itself vibrating under their weight, the sound arriving before the sight, a low thunder that you feel in your chest before you hear it with your ears. That was the world the Lakota inhabited. That was the heartbeat of their existence. And they did not simply hunt this animal the way a predator hunts prey. They built their entire civilization around it. Their shelter, their clothing, their tools, their food, their medicine, their spiritual life, every thread of it woven from the body of the bison. Their relationship with this creature was not one of domination. It was something far more complex, far more intelligent, and far more profound than domination. It was reverence, made practical. It was gratitude expressed through engineering. They believed, at the deepest level of their culture, that nothing given by the earth should ever be wasted. Not a bone, not a drop of blood, not a single organ that most of us today would discard without a second thought. And that belief was not poetry, written by people who had the luxury of philosophy. It was a survival code forged by people who had absolutely no room for waste. And over centuries, that code produced solutions so precise, so intelligent, so far ahead of their time, that the greatest secret of Lakota survival was never their courage on the battlefield, never their legendary horsemanship, never even their intimate knowledge of the land. The greatest secret was hidden inside the body of the bison itself. And what they did with every single part of it, will change everything you think you know about the word ingenuity. Let's start with the problem every single person on the Great Plains faced every single day: water. In the scorching heat of a plains summer, a hunter could cover 30 miles on horseback without passing a single river, a single stream, a single puddle of standing water. Clay jars cracked, wooden flasks leaked, and carrying anything heavy on horseback across that terrain was a liability that could get you killed. The Lakota solved this with something that most people would have thrown away without a second thought: the gallbladder of the bison. This small, unassuming organ had walls so thick, so naturally elastic, so completely impermeable to liquid, that it functioned like a ready-made water flask engineered by nature itself. The preparation was meticulous. After carefully removing the organ without puncturing its outer membrane, women of the tribe rinsed it repeatedly with clean river water, then scoured the interior with fine sand and smooth stones, until every trace of residue was gone. It was then stuffed with dry grass to hold its shape and hung in the shade to dry slowly over several days, never in direct sunlight, because too much heat would make the walls brittle and destroy everything. What emerged was a container that was translucent, feather-light, and when collapsed completely flat, small enough to tuck into a belt pouch. Filled with water, it expanded naturally, holding over a liter of liquid sealed with a twisted bark stopper. But here is the part that stops people cold: the water inside stayed cool. Not because of ice, not because of insulation, but because the organic walls of the gallbladder allowed microscopic evaporation, creating a natural cooling effect that kept the contents several degrees below the outside temperature even after hours under a blazing sun. A hunter pulling that flask from his belt after a full day's ride and feeling the coolness against his palm. That was not luck. That was physics, understood and applied centuries before anyone wrote the word thermodynamics. But water, as extraordinary as this solution was only the beginning. Because the most astonishing technology the Lakota possessed was not something they carried in their hands. It was something they hung inside their teepee and read like a clock. Picture this. It is the middle of the night on the open plains. The sky is clear. There is no wind. Nothing outside gives any warning of what is coming. But a woman in the camp reaches up in the darkness and presses her palm against a pale, stiff object hanging near the smoke hole of the teepee. The dried lungs of a bison, prepared weeks earlier through a slow, careful process of curing in the warm air above the central fire. And what she feels under her fingers makes her wake the entire camp immediately. The lungs have softened, they have expanded, they have absorbed moisture from the air that no human nose could detect, no human skin could feel. A blizzard is coming, not tomorrow, not in hours, tonight. The Lakota understood something that took modern meteorology centuries to formalize: that atmospheric pressure drops and humidity rises before a major storm, and that porous organic tissue responds to those changes faster and more sensitively than almost any early instrument. Modern weather stations use electronic hygrometers and barometric sensors to detect these same shifts. The Lakota used dried bison lungs, and their accuracy, proven across hundreds of winters of survival, was not approximate. It was the difference between life and freezing to death on the open prairie. They never used the words atmospheric pressure. They never needed to. They just listened to what the body of the animal was telling them, and they trusted it with their lives. Now, if water storage and weather prediction show you the elegance of Lakota engineering, what happens next shows you its raw, almost shocking power. Imagine needing to feed 30 people on a treeless plain, with no metal pots, no ceramic bowls, nothing that could sit over an open fire without burning. The solution the Lakota developed was so counterintuitive, so physically precise, that the first European settlers who witnessed it refused to believe it worked, until they ate the food that came out of it. They used the bison's stomach as a cooking vessel. The organ was cleaned thoroughly with river sand, stretched between 4 wooden stakes above a shallow pit, and filled with water and ingredients: meat, roots, wild onions, herbs. Then, in a separate fire built nearby, smooth river stones were heated to approximately 600 degrees Celsius, a temperature hot enough to glow faintly red at the edges. Using long wooden tongs, the women transferred these stones directly into the water inside the suspended stomach. The sound that followed, the violent hiss of cold water meeting superheated stone, the immediate rolling boil erupting through the vessel, was the sound of survival made audible. New stones replaced cooling ones in a continuous cycle, maintaining a vigorous boil that cooked an entire meal in the time it would take most people to build a fire. The stomach walls, protected by the water absorbing all the heat before it could reach the organic tissue, remained completely intact. This was not primitive cooking. This was applied thermodynamics, and it worked with a precision that a physicist would recognize immediately. But of everything the Lakota drew from the bison, every tool, every vessel, every instrument, nothing reveals the true depth of their scientific understanding more than what they did with the brain. Tanning animal hide into soft, wearable leather is one of the most chemically complex processes in traditional craftsmanship. Modern tanneries use chromium salts, synthetic acids, and industrial machinery to achieve it. The Lakota used the brain of the same animal whose hide they were processing, and there is an old saying that captures this perfectly. Every animal has enough brains to tan its own hide. This is not folklore. It is biochemistry. The brain of a bison contains an extraordinary concentration of lipids and natural emulsifying oils that, when worked into a stretched, dried hide, penetrate the microscopic protein fibers and coat each one individually, preventing them from bonding rigidly together as they dry. The result is leather so soft, so supple, so perfectly flexible, that it moved with the body in temperatures from -40 to over 100 degrees, without cracking, without stiffening, without failing. The process was long. Days of stretching, kneading, smoking the hide over smoldering rotten wood to set the fibers permanently. But the product outlasted everything the early industrial world tried to compete with it. And here, at this moment, the question from the very beginning of this video starts to find its answer. What is technology? The Lakota had no laboratories. They had no chemistry degrees. They had observation, patience, and an understanding of the natural world so intimate, so precise, that they extracted industrial-grade solutions from materials that the modern world would discard without a second glance. Here is a number that should make you uncomfortable. According to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, the modern world wastes between 30 and 40% of all food produced globally every single year. 30 to 40%. Thrown away. Discarded. Forgotten in the back of a refrigerator. Now consider this. The Lakota wasted 0% of a 600-pound animal in the middle of a wilderness with no refrigeration, no storage facilities, no technology as we define that word today. Zero. Every organ had a purpose. Every bone had a function. Every drop of fat, every length of tendon, every inch of hide, transformed, used, honored. Think about what the average person in 2024 needs just to match what the Lakota extracted from a single bison. A water bottle, a cooking pot, a weather app, a leather jacket, a sewing kit, a set of tools, a fuel source, a storage container. We reach for 17 different products, manufactured in 17 different factories, shipped across 17 different supply chains, to do what one animal and one people accomplished, with nothing but knowledge and patience. And what is extraordinary is not just the efficiency, it is the intelligence behind it. Researchers studying traditional survival technologies have drawn direct inspiration from the evaporative cooling principle of the bison gallbladder when designing passive cooling systems for environments where electricity is unavailable. From remote field stations to early concepts for lightweight hydration systems built to function in extreme heat. The principle the Lakota applied instinctively, through generations of careful observation, is the same principle that modern engineers now work to replicate from scratch. The Lakota never used the word sustainable. They never attended a conference on zero-waste living. They never read an article about reducing their environmental footprint. They simply could not afford to waste anything. And over centuries, that absolute necessity transformed into something far greater than survival strategy. It became a philosophy. It became a culture. It became an identity so deeply embedded in their relationship with the natural world that the very idea of discarding something useful would have been not just impractical, it would have been unthinkable. They were living sustainably, hundreds of years before the modern world invented the concept, and they were doing it not as a lifestyle choice, but as the only way they knew how to truly live. So let's go back to the question we asked at the very beginning of this journey. The question that has been waiting quietly underneath everything you've heard. What is technology? After everything you've just experienced, the gallbladder that cooled its own water in the desert heat, the dried lungs that felt a storm coming before any human eye could see it, the stomach that boiled a meal for an entire camp using nothing but river stones and physics, the brain that chemically transformed raw hide into leather, so perfect that no factory has fully replicated it. After all of that, I think you already know the answer. You knew it before I asked. Technology is not silicon. It is not steel. It is not a patent filed in a laboratory or a formula written on a whiteboard by someone with a PhD. Technology is what happens when human beings pay close enough attention to the world around them, for long enough, with enough humility, with enough desperation, that the world begins to speak back. The Lakota listened. For centuries, through the coldest winters this continent has ever recorded, and the hottest summers a grassland can produce. On a plain with no shelter, no margin for error, and no second chances, they listened, and the bison answered every single time. Now close your eyes for just a moment, and try to feel what that world actually was. You are standing alone on the open grassland. There is nothing around you in any direction. No building, no road, no sound except the wind. And the wind is not gentle. It is cutting through your clothing, through your skin, finding every place where your body is losing heat and pulling it away from you. The horizon is empty. The sky above you is turning the color of a bruise at the edges, that particular shade of purple-gray that means something is coming, and coming fast. You are cold. You are thirsty, and you are very, very small against everything that surrounds you. That feeling, that ancient, wordless, completely human fear of being exposed and alone and unprepared, is exactly the feeling the Lakota faced every single morning of their lives. And instead of being broken by it, they built a civilization from it. They took everything that terrified them and transformed it, piece by piece, organ by organ, into everything they needed, not just to survive, but to live with dignity, with ingenuity, and with a grace that still echoes across the centuries to reach us here, today. That is not just engineering. That is not just survival. That is the deepest, most enduring form of human courage there is. The courage to look at an impossible world and say, "We will find a way." If this story moved something in you, if it cracked open something you didn't expect, if it made you see the past, or the present, even slightly differently than you did an hour ago, then you are exactly who Primal Echoes was built for. Hit subscribe so you never miss what we uncover next. Leave a comment and tell us, which moment in this video stopped you cold? Which piece of this hit you hardest? Because the next episode takes us even further, into a world even more unforgiving, and a people whose ingenuity will leave you equally speechless. The Echo is just beginning.